Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again, live from Film Fanatic headquarters here in the giant city of Northport, Maine. So thanks again for people checking out the videos. Uh, you know, Always want to welcome all the new subscribers that have been coming on board the last couple of weeks or so. It's been a lot of fun. I've been cranking out a little bit more as far as content goes. I've been putting out some more videos. I've had a little bit more time. I've had a little bit more of a drive to push the level of content I've been putting up. Again, it's like I get really excited and I think about the love that I have of movies, and also that there seems to be people out there who care about some of these things that I talk about, some of these weird, obscure movies. And again, I like to always mix things up, change things up, add some new flavors, bring some variety to the channel. But the focus kind of always, for the most part, bringing a lot of movies that are definitely obscure and kind of in the movies that definitely come out of the underground, murky depths of cinema. Those films are, will probably always be the focus of this channel. Bringing those things to light. Just talking about those films. A lot of new discoveries, films that I saw, when I was younger. And at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's really about these films. And if I can, get a couple of people interested, in horror related films or science fiction films, especially if they, are interested in taking deep dives along with me and exploring this huge genre that we all know and love, and discovering all of these super obscure gems in the exploitation world, specifically. So that's always been, that will always be the primary focus of that, and that's my favorite thing to do. And it's, overall my favorite genre of filmmaking, my favorite genre of films. I look at it too. I have, I try to always have an open mind to new things, new ideas. That's one thing I feel, one trait that I've had ever since I was a kid that I think is a pretty good trait to have. But I've always had a pretty open mind to art, and always having a sense of wanting to discover new things, and being trying to always be open and try not to be too rigid into thinking that I might only like one or two particular things. I try to always broaden my scope of things. I do that, I kind of do that all the time with music, and being that I'm a musician and I, attempt to have a career, that's definitely a big component of it. But even outside of that, I try to always, when I talk about music things on this channel, I try to always look at it from the perspective of being a music connoisseur, a fan, just a general fan of music, and something that makes me excited, something that makes me that inspires me, and and in terms, I try to mostly talk about in terms of not really about myself, but more so just being a fan of music. And I've always, ever since a young age, I don't know, I've kind of always, I'm not sure where it came from, but I just always had a curiosity about checking out new things and trying not to be too defined by like a particular label or a group. I, you know, always have had that kind of thing of where, I grew up mostly in the 80s and 90s, of where I was, in my high school years and also in my middle school years, my music taste tended to be really into extreme music, like extreme metal, thrash metal, death metal, and then eventually black metal. And that was very much, you know, a huge part of my youth. And those styles of music are still something that I have a deep love for. And even over the last, few years, I've kind of gone back to checking out more of that particular, style of music even more. And I've also been discovering a lot of newer bands in that style, or in those styles. But I remember even, and that style of music, for instance, when I was a kid, it was part of, and is now as an old man, is part of my DNA. Like that's just part of who I am, and it's like an automatic thing. But I remember, I don't know, even at a young age, I always had a curiosity for other styles of music, and I think it's mainly attributed to being, we're all products of our environment and what we get exposed to. And I think for the most part, as a kid, I was fortunate enough to have friends or people that I knew that were from very different kinds of, different walks of life, or people that had very different tastes than I had. And I got exposed to a lot of, I've talked about it a lot. I got exposed to a lot of electronic music when I was a kid. At the same time that I was a, full-on metalhead, I had friends that were DJs and they were into, the early forms of techno music. I grew up in the 90s in New York, so like the hip hop rap thing was going on. I got, exposed to a lot of cool music in those areas at a really young age. And when I was a super hardcore metalhead kid, I was into like groups like Depeche Mode. I was into like Cypress Hill, Public Enemy. I tried to always, have an open mind where I found my friends, or my clique of friends that I was, always hanging out with. They pretty much became very rigid and in a strange way very conservative as far as their musical tastes. Once they gravitated towards a certain style, they kind of, to a degree, ignored other styles of music and only kind of focused on that particular thing. I always, I never really, even though I was part of that, I I never really felt comfortable only being defined or being under that label. I always wanted to seek out other things, and I've always, so I don't know. It was that's always been a thing for me. And again, that's just from my perspective of being a fan of music. And the same thing always happened. When I got into film, the same thing was, the case. Like I got exposed to a lot of different things at a younger age, and then also, especially in my college, when I was in college, I had various friends that were into so many different kinds of films. So I was fortunate enough to really, soak up a lot of those things, as well as music. So I've always kind of had, I've always tried to have an open mind to things. And naturally, there's always things that we always kind of gravitate towards, or, styles that is kind of our go-to thing. And I feel like that's kind of a natural thing, as how how we are as people in our tastes. With music, for instance, it's for me, with the perspective that I love a lot, so many different styles of genres, and I'm always trying to check out new things. I naturally always gravitate towards jazz music, anything under that umbrella, as being some of my favorites, one of my favorite styles or genres, and especially my favorite being electronic music. Like I always go back to that. That's like a daily occurrence. I'm always checking out things in those respective genres, and that's my jam. That's my deepest love. And with film, it's the same thing. With horror and science fiction, I always kind of gravitate towards that, even though I have a real wide range of things that I love. That's just kind of my jam, so I just kind of naturally always go back to that. So today's show is on a movie that I just discovered. Probably, well, yeah, it was late, probably about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. I got this movie on Christmas from Santa Claus. Apparently, I didn't get, that was a year I did not get any coal in my stocking, and instead of coal, I got a bunch of movies from Santa Claus. So it was a pretty good year. This movie is just amazing. I had never heard of it, never seen it before, and quite frankly, I've just been blown away by this movie. And it's called The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies. This is one of the greatest horror exploitation movies slash musicals that I've ever seen. This came out in 1964, and it is such an amazing journey. It's so entertaining on so many levels. It's got, and again, the most hilarious aspect of this film is that if you look this film up, it's kind of labeled as like a horror musical. And traditionally I'm not a huge fan of musicals. There are some musicals and films that I like that are, I guess you they could be considered musicals. I mean, one film, for instance, is Ridley Scott's Legend with Tom Cruise. That's technically a musical. There are singing and dancing sequences in that film, and I love that film. There's a few others, but generally I'm not a huge fan of musicals, but I respect them, and there are some great classics. And it's just odd to me that this is kind of labeled as a musical, and I can see that because it has like a theatrical element to it, to where it does feel like you're watching a theatrical production. And there are these you know even though it's so low budget and so campy and ridiculous and weird, there are these kind of productions of these dance sequences that are pretty elaborate. And there's also these musical sequences that kind of take place on a stage, like a focused stage kind of environment. So it very much has that. It's very over the top and very it's kind of set in this carnival atmosphere. And this movie has so many great elements. It's super bizarre. It's super strange. It's incredibly campy. It's, again, when I discover these movies, I am just so blown away by how, utterly ridiculous they are, but so incredibly entertaining they are. And the fact that how old these films are. This is 64. This is over 50 years old. And it's amazing. I mean, it's so pulpy and just so popping with life. The colors, the richness of the scenes. Even though, again, it's so low budget and ridiculous, it's so utterly entertaining, this film. And, again, it came out in 1964. Just wild. It was directed by Ray Dennis Steckler. And the art direction the way the design of this film is just so gorgeous. It's just visually it's something to really be seen, and it definitely has. I think the art direction and kind of the aesthetics, the way the way it's shot, but then all of these kinds of set pieces that are used in the film are almost feel like, it almost makes you feel like you're watching an art house film, even though this is the very definition of pure exploitation. It's really visually it's beautiful to look at. And the art director was Mike Harrington. And again, this came out in 1964. And the synopsis of the story is just wild. But basically, hoping to relax for the day, beatniks Jerry, Cash Flagg, and Angela, Sharon Walsh, and Harold, Atlas King, head to a seaside carnival, but after visiting a strange fortune teller, Madame Estrella, played by Brett O'Hara, Jerry is transformed into a ruthless killer and a penchant for performing song and dance at the park's nightclub. And as if Jerry's attacks along the beach weren't enough, Estrella inadvertently unleashes a horde of undead minions on the unsuspecting carnival populace. I mean, just wild. It's got zombies. It's got, it does. It's a very dark movie too because of the whole aspect of where one of the characters is like basically transformed into this, basically like a serial killer. It's pretty gothic and it's pretty grimy. It's definitely kind of a sleazy movie, and it definitely has a really ramped up kind of horror element. He's actually that whole part of the storyline of where this one character becomes this serial killer and basically is killing all these people is actually pretty scary and pretty frightening. And it's an interesting I guess juxtaposition with everything else being kind of silly and over the top. The atmosphere, the carnival atmosphere, and it's so incredibly pulpy. So it has like some pretty deep and kind of disturbing horror elements amongst this real ridiculous or within this really ridiculous world that this movie is. Um, it's just incredible. The special features. Unfortunately, this isn't on Blu-ray, but I would love to get this on Blu-ray. But this collection, this is the 41st anniversary edition. So this is like this basically is a collector's edition of this film, and it's got some really great special features on here. It's got some interviews with a lot of the people that were involved in this film, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. I had never heard of this film before I got this from Santa Claus, and I think it was not this past Christmas, but the year before I got this from Santa Claus, and I was super excited, and I had never seen this before, and I'm like, wow, I was really surprised that Santa Claus had such cool taste that they would pick this out for me, and yeah, it's totally a wild trip of a movie. It's kind of psychedelic because obviously it takes place during the mid '60s, so it has a very psychedelic element. It's a super trippy movie in a lot of ways, and Ray Dennis Steckler, a pretty tremendous filmmaker. He was also known by the pseudonym of Cash Flagg. He was an American director, producer, screenwriter, and he was best known for all of his low budget cult films. And where he had a pretty extensive career in the '60s and '70s, I believe. Um, he went under. It's so funny. He used so many different pseudonym names for his various, you know, uh, work that he did over the years. For some reason, he worked under all of these different uh, names. Some of the other films he worked on were as 1962's Wild Guitar, and obviously this classic right here, The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies. And the other thing that's so funny is I have to say that this is probably the longest titled. This film has the longest title probably in movie history, which is so ridiculous. He also did, and this came out in '64. There was another film that came out in '64 also, the Thrill Killers, which is I think, and I haven't seen any of his other films, I've seen a couple of the trailers for his other films, and they seem like they're a little bit more definitely hardcore like exploitation films, but they seem a little bit less campy, a little bit more on the serious side of things. But definitely, they're definitely films I really want to see. He did a short film called the Lemon Grove Kids in 1965. He did. He also directed some like '60s music videos from, which is really strange and wild. He did a music video for this group called Naz, Nazzs. Open My Eyes. He did that in '68. He was also an actor in some films. He's actually in this film too. He plays the lead, one of the leads. He was an actor in this other film in '71 called Blood Shack, where he's one of the leads in that. He was in another film called Sexual Satanic Awareness in 1972. I mean, these titles are just amazing. Triple Play in '74. Sexorcist Devil. He was a lead in that in '74. Perverted Passion in '74. Teenage Hustler, '75. These are all like acting roles that he played. He was in more films as an actor than he was as a director. But again, that's one interesting similarity, one commonality that I've seen with discovering a lot of these exploitation directors, in the '60s, '70s, and '80s, that these guys that were in the exploitation world, they had such a varied background in working, in so many different capacities of the world of filmmaking. A lot of them were actors, like this guy here, uh, where they acted in a lot of their own films or worked on lots of other films as actors. They were also really heavily involved with writing, the writing aspect of many films. They also, a lot of them have backgrounds in the art departments, in various exploitation films. Some of them even have extensive backgrounds in like the practical effects. They've also like helped finance a lot of their own films. Just really multifaceted people, and I think a lot of these guys, really. I think when you see a lot of these films, when they after they you know they have all of this experience working on all these films, it seems like they have. I get a sense you kind of see that on the screen, because they just have this really eclectic vision, and I think it's because they have you know a pretty different perspective from people who might be just coming from being a straight up director, where that's their job. They're directing, and they're the captain of the ship, but that's their primary focus, and maybe that's all that they've done. They haven't worked in all of these other areas, and it seems from what I've gathered from like directors that I've rediscovered and directors I've discovered for the first time, especially in the exploitation world, is that a lot of these guys had backgrounds in so many different departments, and you kind of see that. At least I do. You kind of see this real eclectic perspective when they're in that position of being a director, because they have a lot of different perspectives that they're kind of bringing to the table, and it just makes, I think it gives the films a little bit more of an interesting kind of narrative, or a really you know different perspective that you don't normally see. And I think this film is an example. It's definitely an example of that with Ray Dennis Steckler. I mean, just with his background being predominantly as an actor, but also working in all kinds of other areas. Really eclectic and pretty strange, and it really is. I feel is really something you see, because of his background. He brings all of those, all of those different skills that he's acquired to the screen. So the films are always a little bit, really original and really eclectic and weird, and but terrific, terrific movie. I love this movie to death, and I just discovered it roughly about 2 years ago. I've seen it a few times. I'm really excited about watching it again. It would be cool to get this on Blu-ray, but this edition is actually really great. It comes with some really cool artwork. Um, the packaging is really cool, even though it's like DVD. And this movie is like pretty obscure. I think this movie, when it was released in the '60s, again, this came out in '64. The the I believe this film had a pretty good theatrical run, and it was really, really embraced for a while. But then I believe it kind of went into like total obscurity. And I want to definitely check it out. Trying to see what company put this out. I can't really see what company, but I'd be really interested to see if this film is reissued, you know, through like one of the big labels like Synapse or Vinegar Syndrome or Severin, to see if this is like, which it probably is. If it's probably available on like 4K now, but there's guaranteed there's probably a really great Blu-ray version of this out and about, and that would be definitely something to see. This movie is like I don't know, another way I can describe this film. It's like going to the carnival or an amusement park on acid. Like it's wild, and I love that again it came out like 50 years ago or so, which is just crazy. But and that it came out in '64, but it just has that '60s vibe, and it's such a it has that psychedelic tone throughout the whole film, and it's super funny. It's goofy. It's technically a musical. There's a lot of singing and dancing in it. The dance sequences are awesome, but then it also has a pretty strong, like I had mentioned before, a pretty strong and a little bit more of a serious horror tone to it, particularly around one of the lead characters when he kind of becomes the serial killer. It's got zombies in it. I mean, it's just got, and I think this movie has lots of different things in it, and I think people would be really, it's got something for everyone. I think it's one of those films, and it's kind of light too. It's actually kind of a light film, and I think whatever your tastes are, if you're into like goofy, ridiculous, absurd movies, or you're into like kind of art house films even, or if you're into like musicals, or if you're into straight up horror, you would there's something in this film for you. So I highly recommend this film. This is a classic. This is one of my favorite fairly recent discoveries in the world of exploitation. I love this movie to death. It's just so awesome. Please give this movie a spin if you get a chance. And in the meantime, I'll be seeking and looking around in my travels to see if this is available on Blu-ray, which I'm sure it is. So, thanks again for everyone and their support. One last thing I wanted to mention today during the show was I want to give a big thank you and shout out to Matthew Littlefield, who is a local guy who lives pretty close in the area. He's also a musician, and he has a really cool podcast that he started a few years ago where he talks about lots of different things, social issues or local issues, and then he also covers things about music, covers things about films. But he had me on his show yesterday, and I did an interview on his podcast, and it was my first time doing being interviewed on someone else's show. And we did a show. It was like a little over an hour, and we just talked about films. We started off talking about music, but the majority of the show was about just different different things around films, and I thought it was a super fun experience. I have never done it before. I was nervous, and he was a great host, and he was really gracious, and I really want to give him a shout out, thanking him for having me on the show. My first time doing that, so thanks again. So I uploaded that show to I uploaded that podcast up to, or I shared it on Facebook and a couple other places. So check that out. I'll probably upload that to the channel. The interview. It's pretty interesting, I think. So, but thanks again, everybody, for your support, and we will see you next time. Peace.